ar gyfer pnawn yma. The first is going to be a panel session with Ian Tweedale. We'll have a little break, wedyn ddim wedi gael a live link I New York, I Efrog Newydd. So edrych mlaen I hwnna, croesi blysedd, bod y technoleg mynd I weithio, so fingers crossed the technology will work. I'm doing a job here, I'm doing simultaneous translation. So yeah, wedyn ar y diwedd o'r dydd wedyn, fe gyda ni sesiwn panel dan cadroddiaeth Adam Price. So fydd cyfle I bobl gofyn cwestiynau, ond jyst ni rapio fyny'r dydd. Felly, ia, os da chi'n hapus I gychwyn, fewn ni at y sesiwn gyntaf. So, welcome. If you can, if I would just start off, dechrau off. Sioned, wyt ti'n egluro pwy wyt ti?
Sioned Wyn Roberts ydy'n enw fi. Dwi'n comisiynu cynnwys S4C ac yn gyfrifol am raglenni plant, raglenni dysgwyr ac addysg.
Okay, and I'm Ian Tweedale. I'm the head of interactive and learning in BBC Wales. So
thank you for stepping in there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so the purpose of this afternoon session is to look at commissioning educational content, but from a broadcast perspective. I think we're more aware now that there's more and more content being commissioned, and content for the education space is becoming more important. Felly, na I dechrau dwi'n meddwl wrth holi Sioned. Felly, o ran S4C, Sioned, os o fi egluro hefyd, dwi yn gweithio S4C, fi Hyw Marshall, fi gweithiolwr digidol S4C, ni'n gweithio yn gilydd. O ran S4C, pan wyt ti'n edrych I comisiynu cynnwys I oedolion ag I blant, sut mae'r ochr addysg yn dod I fewn I dy ffordd o feddwl?
Wel, mae'n ailla'n sgwrs efo'r cwmnïau yn unigol, os ydyn nhw enghraifft yn cynnig prosiect fel Detectives Hanes enghraifft. Mae hwnnw'n brosiect ar gyfer stwnsh, mae'n hwyl, lot o jokes, lot o hwyl hanesyddol, ond mae o hefyd yn berffaith ar gyfer cerbyd, os liciwch chi, ar gyfer cynnwys addysg hefyd. Wedyn, oedden ni wedi gweithio hefo Green Bay, oedden nhw'n gwneud cyfres o 8, wel, mae yna drydydd cyfres rwan yn cael ei gwneud, cyfres o 8 rhaglen hanner awr, a wedyn hefyd maen nhw wedi creu tua 30 I 40 o ffilmiau byr, tua 3 munud yr un, a fydd rhywun wedyn yn mynd ar y we yn y lle addysg. Felly, mae'n rhannol bod yr cwmnïau'n awgrymu, neu yn rhannol bod fi yn awgrymu. Dwi'n ffeindio bod cynnwys mor ddrud, os fedrwch chi gynnig o fel rhan o'r pecyn yn gynnar yn y broses gomisiynu, mae'n llawer iawn rhatach I bawb ac yn well.
A wedyn, jyst I symud ymlaen, o ran dy berthynas di wedyn efo'r adran addysg y Llywodraeth, wyt ti'n amlwg yn siarad efo nhw I weld beth I gyfynion nhw hefyd, sut mae'r perthynas yna'n gweithio?
Mae'n eitha diddorol, achos dwi'n dŵad o gefndir cynhyrchu rhaglenni addysg, o'n i'n arfer gweithio yn adran addysg y BBC. A mae gwneud rhaglenni I ysgolion yn hollol wahanol i'r math o beth ni'n neud yn S4C. Felly ar gyfer stwnsh sydd I blant rhwng 7 a 13, neu ar gyfer cyw I blant o ddim I 7. Adloniant ac adloniant ffeithiol neu comedi neu animeiddio, dyma da ni'n neud, da ni ddim yn darparu cynnwys pyr ar gyfer ysgolion. Felly, beth sy'n bwysig I ni efo'r Llywodraeth ydy bod ni yn meddwl ymlaen llaw ydy'r math yma gynnwys y math o beth fysa ysgolion isio, sut fedra ni deilwra fo. Ar gyfer cyw a plant bach, mae cael addysg neu dysgu wrth fwynhau rhaglen cyw yn rhywbeth hollol naturiol. Efo stwnsh, mae'n fwy o broblem. Unwaith ydych chi'n cael trio snicio rhywfaint o gynnwys addysg I mewn I adloniant ffeithiol neu adloniant comedi, yna mae'n dechrau mynd yn anodd a mae'n dechrau
arlein. So I'll move on to Ian. You're quite different from BBC's perspective. You're slightly different because you have a broader range of commissioning content, not just in education, but more of a learning spectrum. Can you explain a little bit, what sort of content you do commission?
Okay. Well, I think really there's sort of three areas that we're really focused on. The first is we obviously do general programs, factual programs, into which there's a sort of education component as well. So, I mean, a good example of that is Story of Wales recently, that certainly the sort of Welsh Government picked up on, and there's whole chunks of that within Hub now, so the virtual learning environment. The second really is a sort of online one, and that's really where we've sort of looked at how we move from a whole myriad of sites, websites, into something which is a bit more sort of focused. So we've created something called the Knowledge and Learning product, and within that we do two things. So there's one which is factual output that we're sort of creating new types of formats. So we've got something called I Wonder and I Wonder guides. So these guides are sort of being created with a new type of format, which is sort of tops and tail with video and then text and interactive features within it. So we're increasingly doing that. We in the middle of producing a whole bunch of those, say, for the Dylan Thomas season that we've got, through to how to learn to sing Calon Lan, for example, at the other end of the extreme. Now, that's sort of broader for the general audience. And then in addition to that, we've got Bite Size, which is our sort of core formal learning brand. And that's really what we're sort of producing a whole range of study guides that relate to the curriculum, and in particular getting Welsh language content specific to that content that is UK-wide. So having a Welsh language version of the stuff that we produce. We might actually be commissioned to produce something UK-wide, and some of the team here are making this as well. So we'll be commissioned from BBC Learning in Salford, who are our main commission upon the UK. We'll actually get involved in writing a UK subject, be it drama or geography or maths even, and then we'll do a Welsh language version of that at the same time. So it's that's the second area. Yeah. The third area is really around, rather than necessarily authoring content specifically for educational use, it's looking at how we open up our archive to schools in particular, and how we've been doing this in further and higher education as well more recently. So schools' access to the wealth of BBC programme content that can then be used in the classroom is the third area, and I think a really important area of what we do.
Is it a challenge for you, obviously being based in Wales, because obviously BBC is a national organisation, but education is a devolved matter between Wales, England and Scotland. So how does your relationship, in order to sort of ensure that content that you're commissioning is relevant to the curriculum? Is that? Yeah,
well, I think there's two areas there. One is that we make sure that there are versions of the UK-wide content in Welsh in particular, and that's a big area of what we do. The English language stuff largely is relevant to what's being studied in Wales. Also, we've got a separate budget locally, which we commission to, both in-house and external as well, that's specific to Wales. So if there are things like Welsh second language, for example, then that's clearly something that's not a version of a UK offer. That's something that's quite specific to Wales. So we would fund that locally, for example. So, but it's a difficult one, because actually the BBC is a pan-UK organisation, as you say, rightly so. But I think it's really about how, in a devolved education environment, we deliver the right sorts of content into the nations, if you want to call it that. So Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales. When the context is overall to create a sort of unified UK offer. So it's a bit of a balancing act, and I don't think we've got it right yet, but I think we're working towards that.
But I think, because it's interesting, because it's something, when I came into the job at S4C, it wasn't an area that I was aware of at all. And a lot of my work now is dealing with the Welsh Government and with the Education Department in order to find out what they want, because I think we're in the process now, S4C, of having teachers coming in on a secondment, which will lead on to, you touched on it, is archive. So, you know, what we need to find as well is that there's a wealth of IP that currently exists in archives, not just the SLCs and BBCs, but residing with the production companies, and how that can be repurposed from that point of view. So you're talking about archives, sort of obviously SLC and BBC are working together to try and get our archives into schools. Do you want to discuss a bit further about, you know, what's been happening in that space and moving forward?
Yeah. So I've got a couple of little videos that might help actually. So let me just sort of.
We love videos.
Yeah, I won't take you through all the PowerPoint because you've probably been sick of PowerPoint by now, but let me see if we can just look at a couple of these. Let me just pause that a second and give you a bit of context. So this is a little video, it's only a couple of minutes long, and it's from one of our partners on something called the Research and Education Space Project, RES, of which SLC is another partner, which is great. And JISC is the organisation that's our partner on this. They've just produced this little video to explain the opportunity for opening up those archives in an educational context. We think we can do this first in both higher and further and schools, secondary and primary education, because it's a ring-fenced area in the sense that people can access it in an authenticated place, and it just parks all the rights issues, because it's your question about indies and all sorts of other rights owners. It's a nightmare in terms of making that content available. So in a ring-fenced educational area, and we're going to be piloting this in a school sense first in Wales, it makes a lot of sense to sort of do that in that sort of context. So that's just a bit of background to this, and I'll just shut up now and play it. I'm not taking statins yet.
I don't want to talk to you about Syria.
So that's a sort of glitzy one, and the aim of that really is to give you a feel for what's coming, and actually the glitzy stuff is really important in the context of schools, because the ability to make this video content available and be able to be clipped up and downloaded, eventually it's streamed at the moment, will be downloaded in the future, is really quite key. So that's the sort of idea. How are people using it? We've already piloted this with our other partner, the British University Film Video Council, in higher education, and this is how they've been looking at it. We'll see what the ad is now for this one.
Sometimes you want something that really brings things to life.
They can put this video into their course so easily. It's like kind of a little piece of magic.
Bob's an incredibly useful resource that engages both staff and students in a teaching and learning process.
Bob kind of ticked all the boxes for us.
We've used it as a way of being able to completely change the way we deliver online access to AV resources.
All services are available to students on the device that they have in their pockets.
They like the fact that they can search the archive. They like the fact that they can see that programme immediately, and they like to be able to take clips out of it and use it in their own work.
For the teachers, it really adds another kind of element to their lectures and to their online courses.
Our learners are more receptive to the content that we deliver through Bob.
Our learning now is moving away from the traditional lecture-based classroom learning to independent learning.
It allows us to provide playlists, it allows us to provide prep material. They'll use that material and come into class prepared.
With Bob, you can always use examples from television or from the radio to back up your research.
They'll have an ability and a knowledge that expands what we do in the classroom.
The feedback I've received from students about the use of films, radio excerpts to make lectures more lively has been incredibly positive.
Just the sheer usage has gone up through the roof. It's now one of our most popular resources.
It's online and we can access things like documentaries and course relevant material. It just saves you so much time, and so to that respect it's a brilliant tool.
So Bob is the box of broadcast that the BUFVC have produced as a front end to this archive stuff that we're making available, and I think that that's a really key stage, and we're going to be piloting this in Wales actually with Hub Plus, and as the first part of the UK to look at this in that sort of context as well. So I think that's all quite important, the idea of sort of video resources. I mean, someone in one of the other sessions was saying the kit, you know, the iPads and the broadband networks are all really key, but it's what's the content that's going to run on it, and we're going to have 4 million hours worth of programs that are going to be available eventually through this system in a context, an education context, that ring-fenced environment. So that's going to be a major step forward in terms of the stuff there. We'll still be doing GCSE bite size, and we'll still be doing iWonder guides as well, but this is the third sort of leg on the stool, if you like, of our educational offer, which is going to be around sort of making our content available. I'd also stress that this isn't just a BBC service. We're building the underlying platform, but the front ends to this is going to be through other organisations. The market companies to come in and sort of work with us to build front ends to this that might be public service or might be commercial, using the APIs that we're currently developing, and a single search across everybody's different catalogues of content. So it's not just BBC stuff. So that's an important point to make. So that's the 3 bits, if you like. I'll sit down again.
You can sit down. Thanks, Ian. That was interesting. A dwi'n meddwl, Sioned, o weld yr cynnwys sydd allan yna, yn amlwg o ran ysgolion, ar hyn o bryd, mae yna problemau efo, un o'r rhesymau da ni'n mynd lawr y lôn yma, mae yna problemau efo gael YouTube i fewn i ysgolion o ran firewalls, beth fel yna. So mae hwb yn caniatanu creu'r golwg yna. Ond mae yn her yn dydi, yn wedig yn y sector addysg Gymraeg, o ran gael cynnwys iaith Gymraeg.
Mae'n her mawr, mae'n her iawn i ryddhau archif, mae'n her i gael yr hawliau mwyn i ni gael ail chwarae gynnwys neu rhai cynnwys mewn llefydd gwahanol. A mewn ffordd, o'n i mor frustrated tua 6 mis yn ôl pan oedden ni yn y broses o drio rhyddhau rhywfaint o gynnwys ar gyfer yr prosiect Hope Plus. Be nes i oedd dechrau trafod pethau ffordd arall rownd. Felly, o'n i'n gwybod bod fi isio defnyddio fformat neu defnyddio brand cyw ar gyfer pwrpas rhifedd. Mi oedd Boom sy'n gweithio hefo ni ar cyw. Mi oedd gennyn nhw syniadau o gwmpas rhifedd, a be wnaethon ni oedd bod ni'n mynd at Catrin ar criw yn Hwb. Gofyn iddyn nhw be fysa nhw isio fel ysgolion ar gyfer plant hyd at 6-7 oed. A mi da ni felly, mae nhw yn rhyw fath o gweithio fan ni ar y cynnwys cyn i ni wneud y rhaglen. A wedyn fydda ni wedi clirio bob un dim efo hwnnw. Fydd hwnnw mynd i lai ar y shelf yn barod i fynd unwaith mae Hope Plus yn barod. Felly mae jyst yn neud i ni feddwl mewn ffordd gwahanol i ryw radda, a mae'n bwysig bod ni'n medru cydweithio efo'r Llywodraeth, gwybod be mae nhw'n chwilio amdano fo, be mae athrawon yn chwilio amdano fo. Dim bod rhaid i ni wneud bob dim ar gyfer ysgolion, wrth gwrs, ond mae brand fel cyw a yr graffeg bach cyw, mae mor hawdd i ddefnyddio rhywun ar gyfer pwrpas cael hwyl a dysgu ar yr un pryd. Er enghraifft, mae gennym ni apps. Da ni wedi gwneud app cyw ar wyddor, app cyw ar rhifedd, lot o e-lyfrau ac yn y blaen. Mae rhain yn bethau plant wrth I boddan I defnyddio nhw, a maen nhw'n dysgu yn cael hwyl.
Because with the online space as well, following on from what Sianed's saying, well, S4C's commissioning, BBC as well, obviously, with CBBS and CBBC, it's that sort of gamification as well of you know, because that content is additional content to the programming, but a lot of that content is actually educational, isn't it?
Yeah, very definitely, and we're sort of looking at how we can, if you like, sort of use our big drama brands, for example, to put those in a sort of educational context as well. So we're currently working on a project, Doctor Who project, around coding, and getting sort of kids involved in coding through some of our sort of big brands. We've been doing similar things with our other brands, like with CBBC's Wizards vs Aliens, for example. You know, we gamify the interactive elements of that, and definitely there's a sort of educational context. It's making that stealthy rather than sort of obvious, though, and that's the key thing. It's got to be entertaining and has to sort of fit the brands too. So that's a key part of what we're doing.
Just thinking as well, think of the audience we have here today, physically and online, is obviously the opportunities, because from S4C's commissioning point of view, we're going out and working with independent companies, especially new digital companies, to create that content. With that, are there opportunities with the BBC do you commission that sort of the platforms?
Yeah, very much so. So I think all the sort of games type stuff, we will project manage that in-house, but actually the work gets done by the indie sector. So what we want to do is also to sort of work with not just the usual suspects, but broaden that out. So we've been developing something called the Connected Studio model, which was talked a little bit about yesterday or the day before, I can't remember. No, actually a bit of both days actually. And that's really sort of, it's a different type of commissioning model, because I think one of the things, because we operate on a UK basis, we have to put tenders out UK-wide or actually internationally if it's over a certain amount. Bizarrely, the sort of rules that we operate to are sort of more attuned to IT than they are content. So with procurement rules. So what we want to do is to get companies coming, working with us in a slightly different commissioning model. So we have the traditional commissioning model, and we'll still keep that going, and that's how we do a lot of our work. But this new commissioning model is where we'll publish, say, a broader challenge and invite whoever has got expertise in this area to come and work with us. So that's something that is not just the usual 3 or 4 companies that we might work with. It might be, 30 or 40 companies, and then we'll funnel from a very large number down to a smaller number, and at each stage we whittle that down to the best ideas, and then the best extra ideas, if you like, and then to the ones that we can sort of give development funding to sort of develop prototypes. So that sort of model is...
And I think the benefit of that as well is it accelerates the process as well, doesn't it?
And it just gets companies who have not yet worked with us used to how we operate, and it is a big beast, and I recognise that, the BBC, and it's difficult to work with us because we've got more processes than you can shake a stick at. So it is complicated working with us, but we want to make that as simple as we can, and these new innovation formats will help us do that.
Wel, Sioned yn dilyn ymlaen o be mae Ian newydd ddweud. Mae S4C a BBC yn trafod rhan o cydweithio ar prosiectau Connected Studios yn y dyfodol gobeithio, ond yn un ddiweddar wedi, ddim wedi dwyn, wedi benthyg elfennau o'r Connected Studios ar gyfer comisiynu app newydd ar gyfer y gwasanaeth I ddysgwyr. Ti eisiau sôn, da ni sôn dan lot o heddi o ran yr ochr plant beth, ond beth dan addysg ar gyfer oedolion, cos mae hwnna'n rhywbeth da ni'n mynd i fod yn canolbwyntio ar fwy rwan yn cydweithio efo BBC yn yr ochr yna. Ti eisiau sôn dim bach amdano'r y gwasanaeth newydd a'r proses comisiynu?
Wel, o diwedd mis Medi, mi fydda ni newid yn arlwy ar gyfer dysgwyr. Da ni wedi gwneud ymchwil I pobl yn gwylio rhaglenni ar S4C o ran be maen nhw angen mwyn dysgu a symud I fod yn rhugl. A yr adborth da ni wedi gael ydy I bod nhw lot o ddiddordeb mewn cael help mwyn gwylio y rhaglenni'n gyffredinol. Felly, y diwrnod oedd hi yn sôn amdano fo rwan, mi oedden ni wedi gwahodd, wel, na, dim ni wedi gwahodd, oedd o'n agorad I unrhyw gwmnïau digidol ddod atan ni am ddiwrnod. Mi oedd dysgwyr yna, mi oedd y cwmnïau sy'n gwneud yr cynnwys teledu dysgwyr yna, mi oedd yna arbenigwyr iaith, mi oedd yna bobl o adran addysg y llywodraeth yna, a mi oedd yn gyfle I bobl just rhannu gwybodaeth, just sgwrsio am syniadau ac yn blaen. Ac ar y diwedd, mae oedd y cwmnïau, mae oedd 10 cwmni yn pitio syniad am gynnwys digidol i ni, sut fysa ni medru symud ymlaen o'r teledu, dim just bod pobl yn gwylio teledu a dysgu rhywfaint o Gymraeg, sut ydyn ni'n medru defnyddio apps, sut ydyn ni'n medru defnyddio gwefannau mwyn gwella'r profiad yna. Ac mi oedd y syniadau'n gyffroes iawn. Ac un peth da ni'n wedi gwneud ydy, wel, sawl peth, ond mi fydd na raglenni bob bore dydd Sul i'r ddysgwyr. Ond hefyd, da ni am gymryd 3 prosiect y flwyddyn, enghraifft, lle mae pobl yn medru ailwylio rhan o'r rhaglen, bod nhw'n medru recordio llais, bod nhw'n medru gwylio, darllen y sgriptiau, darllen gwybodaeth am y cymeriadau. Hynny yw bod yna gema, bod yna bob math o gynnwys sydd wedyn yn mynd i ymestyn allan i bobl, ella sydd bron iawn a bod y rhugl ond dim yn teimlo'n hollol gyfforddus ac yn medru defnyddio'r cam digidol mae helpu nhw ddod yn fwy rhugl. Felly dyna'r math o bethau da ni'n medru gynnig. Learning by stealth, as you mentioned, I think that's the best approach for us, I think.
And I think just going back to the connected students, I think what's really impressed me with the connected students from a commissioning point of view is if you're commissioning content and you put out a document saying this is what we want, what you do tend to end up with is basically 10 of the same ideas but with different prices. Whereas with this new model of commissioning, because what you want is maybe companies can come, they have some unique IP that they can bring to the table, and hopefully maybe there's something you've actually said, this is what we want it to do, but at the end of the day, somebody may have an idea, it might be that light bulb thing, sort of, my God, why hasn't anybody thought of this before?
Yeah, very much so, and I think that's also what we want to do with events like this, is to get people meeting each other and talking to each other from different bits of the creative industry. So, you might get some gamers talking to people who are teachers or educationalists, talking to broadcasters, and really sort of coming up with new ways of identifying how to address an issue. So it might be gamification of sort of schools content, for example. So I think that's where the opportunity really lies, and if we can facilitate that through some of the innovation formats that we've got, then I think we're on to a winner.
So I think that there's a challenge there, but it's an interesting way of how can we actually bring educationalists into our world as well. I think because it's a two-way thing, because we need to learn from those those experiences in the classroom. Because I'm talking as a parent of a 5-year-old in school and chair of governors actually of my local primary school, but we have no idea what actually goes on in that classroom. Because I think it was really beneficial today with Hope Plus presentation to actually understand how these new technologies are being implemented. But is there a way that we can accelerate that facilitation? Is from, because you're obviously you're involved with Welsh Government with the National Digital Learning Council. So how does that work then, your role within that sort of organisation?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do there is really sort of spot the opportunities for content and how that might fit into platforms like Hub, for example. So I think that there's a lot of behind the scenes work going on around the pipes and the infrastructure and the kit, but it's then a case of how do you really sort of make sure that the content comes through. How do the people who make content in other areas become aware of what the opportunity is in sort of primary and secondary schools, and really sort of make those connections between those different areas? Because I think that's when we start getting more transformative. I think also it's about the next sort of stage is how do we move from what is still quite an analog way of teaching into a more sort of, if you like, a skills and problem solving based model of teaching, which is much more about knowledge is no longer a thing that you need to cram people's heads with because it's available at the touch of a button. So how do you make that more about skills and more about problem solving and give people the digital tools to really sort of run with that? And I think we've got in Wales we've got some of the core principles in terms of the foundation technologies and stuff like that nearly there. It's then a case of, well, don't just sort of do what you did in the analog world in a digital way, but what's the new way of teaching, what's the new way of delivering on these things?
Because it was interesting, because with the Bob demonstration, I think, and that's the other thing that people are aware, because people are thinking about digital content for education, or we need a maths app. And to a certain extent, it's not about apps, it's about actually giving content in order for teachers to be able to create their own lesson plans, but it's actually sort of enriching that, those lesson plans with video content. Because what's going to be great with the new system is searchability, is the metadata and the tagging. Do you want to mention a little bit about how the functionality of that works for teachers?
On the metadata stuff? Okay, well, I think it sounds really boring and techy.
But it's important though, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, but I think that's the key. If you're thinking about archive development, for example, it's a matter of being able to make available the metadata that you tag to the content that's been produced in video or audio, or still images for that matter, in a way that is readable across different organisations. So one of the key things when we were doing some audience testing on this stuff was we had a bunch of schools in, and they tried to do Google video searches for classroom stuff, and you got literally thousands of search results that were, I would say, 95% irrelevant, and only worked over really the last couple of years. After that, it starts getting quite thin on the ground. So you need this metadata DNA almost to be available and searchable in a clever way. So we're building a search capability that's based on linked open data to make that available, so that if we have the National Museum of Wales, for example, and ourselves as broadcasters and another 4 or 5 different organisations all putting their content in, they still host the content locally with themselves, but the metadata can be read across the different organisations, which means you can search in a single search for something that will, I don't know, illustrate a clip that will illustrate osmosis, or Al Capone if you're doing GCSE history. And that video then that comes up from that takes you right to the bit, because we know also that the teachers haven't got time to mess around watching 30-minute, 40-minute programs. They need to get right to the bit very quickly, and they need to be able to clip it out and whiz it out to their students. So that's really the sort of underlying metadata sort of DNA that we're trying to build.
But I think as well, technology, one of the big challenges, obviously, the BBC sits on a huge pile of tapes. S4C, we have a massive room full of tapes, but it's a lot of those are just tapes at the moment, and obviously the process of digitizing that content, but also contextualizing the content within those tapes, because obviously people who work within the industry are all aware of coming back from a day's filming, sitting down with headphones and actually doing a transcript of what was filmed during that day in order for you to be able to do that editing. So I think that's going to be an interesting challenge now from a technological point of view. I'm going to give a plug to something that we're working on, the Canolfan Bedwyr, Welsh Llywodraeth Cymru ag Ysbrydeg, are funding that technology for voice recognition. But it's the ability then to be able to, what you want in the ideal world is be able to put a tape in a machine that it digitizes it, but it also creates that sort of digital transcript of it with all that metadata built in.
Yeah, I mean, what's cool for us is that since 2007 we've had everything pretty much subtitled. So that's almost by accident given us the metadata, because you can attach the subtitling words to a particular part of the video. So, and what we're doing from then on is capturing stuff onwards. So it's a problem that goes back in time, not a problem that we've got to fix in the future, because from 2007 on we're sorted. It's now going back to 1989 and then further back beyond that as well, and churning through this stuff to make the digitised assets with the right metadata available.
So we move away from metadata, all the dull stuff, but it's important. Sean, just to edrych ymlaen rwan, cos dwi eisiau dod o hwn I ben a weddol sy'n eich ni gael cwpl o gwestiynau, cos da ni'n mynd o angen dipyn bach amser I gosod ar gyfer yr live link I Efrog Newydd. Yn symud ymlaen rwan, o ran fel rhywun sydd yn comisiynu trwch sylweddol o gynnwys bob blwyddyn, oes yna rhywbeth wyt ti'n edrych am o ran cyfleoedd, o ran gofod, o ran y math o raglenni wyt ti'n mynd I fod yn edrych am?
Wel, da ni'n sicr a diddordeb mewn codio o'r ti a finna. Wedyn, da ni Hynny yw, da ni yn arbrofi eitha dipyn efo ail sgrin, da ni wedi defnyddio pethau fel y lift, fel gema sydd ar teledu a hefyd bod plant yn medru ymuno yn ail sgrin. A mae hwnnw mewn ffordd yn helpu i ddysgu, ond da ni'n awyddus rwy'n symud ymlaen ac efallai bod plant yn cael yr sgiliau mae'r mwyn iddyn nhw gael creu cynnwys eu hunain a codio. O ran cynnwys, mae bob tro'n dda i gael syniadau newydd ar gyfer pethau fel gwyddoniaeth, sut mae gwneud rhini'n ataniadol i bobl ifanc a plant. Oes na unrhyw brand sydd gyda ni'n barod a fedrwch chi feddwl am offshoots addysg i'r rhini, neu os na enghraifft lle fedra ni addasu'n cynnwys ni neu comisiynu cynnwys ychwanegol sy'n ffitio mewn i'r gwahanol feysydd yma lle mae angen cynnwys o bob math. Roi jyst un enghraifft i chi o sut nath o'r system ni mewn ffordd, yn sydyn iawn. Nath o weithio. EQ oedd y rhaglen yma, y rhaglen roedd nhw'n dwylo ar enfus. Doedd Makaton, sef yr iaith arwyddo, ddim ar gael yn Gymraeg, a mae rhiant wedi sgwennu mewn yn deud bod i merch hi oedd â Down syndrome. A mi oedd hi'n teimlo bod yna le i ni fod yn gwneud rhywbeth. A mi oedd hwn wedyn wedi datblygu mewn i fformat o'r enw dwylo ar enfus, sef fformat adloniannol EQ. Wel, mi nath hwn jyst mynd yn fwy ac yn fwy ac yn fwy. Nath o ddechrau fel rhaglen, fel cyfres o raglenni EQ, fformat bach lyflu, ond mi nath o wedyn, mi oedd yna app sy'n helpu plant a pobl ifanc efo anghenion ychwanegol, a mi wnaethon ni drafod efo'r Llywodraeth a trio cydweithio ar becyn i athrawon sydd i ddysgu Makaton a sydd i fatha training pack mewn ffordd i athrawon ar gyfer dysgu Makaton yn ysgol a'r Llywodraeth nath ariannu hwnnw. Felly, oedd hwnna'n enghraifft da o lle nath un syniad datblygu fod yn fwy ac yn fwy ac yn fwy. A mewn ffordd, dwi'n falch iawn o'r prosiect yna, achos mae o trwy hwnna, mi da ni rwan wedi cynhyrchu cynnwys a mwy neu lai wedi cael Makaton yn Gymraeg am y tro cyntaf. Felly, bod da ni yn medru gwneud gwahaniaeth, a ella bod nhw'n gama bach, ella bod nhw'n gweithio efo pobl eraill a cyrff eraill, ond da ni yn medru gwneud gwahaniaeth, gobeithio.
So, and Ian, so again, looking forward to the future from a commissioning point of view, are there any sort of spheres or sort of sectors that you're interested in looking to in the future? Because I know sort of 2015 is going to be important from a coding point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is this autumn we're going to be doing the Connected Studio on archive development for education. So I would flag that one up. That's a great opportunity for companies to get involved in. So that's a definite one that we're going to be doing, and we'll be funding development commissions coming out of that to develop the sort of front ends to that archive area. So that's something that's a definite thing that's happening. I think in terms of digital creativity, that's a big priority for us in the next sort of year, 18 months. And I think you could call that coding for teenagers. We did another Connected Studio on that recently, a chapter. But I think that it's broader than that. It's about sort of not just coding. It's about how people. I think that what's changed an awful lot is we're now seeing the term audiences isn't the right word. It's actually in a digital environment, people are much more participants. And I think that for how do we sort of develop new types of content that react to how audiences in the old style now are sort of watching programs and taking part on Twitter, and how do we respond to that? So I think those sort of it's digital creativity in a broader context. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of interest in that area, from coding through to sort of different participation sort of technologies and editorial initiatives, just straight editorial initiatives as well.
Just that, if you're not aware of BBC Connected Studios, if you just Google BBC Connected Studios, it'll take you to the site that's got all the information there, where you can sign up to get information about those.
There'll be all calls for different studio events there, and commissioning rounds, in fact, off the back of those. So that's something to bear in mind. I mean, in addition to that, we are working on our bite-sized content, and some of that we do put out to indies, and the I Wonder guides as well. So that's another area, that format that we're beginning to see really come through now, and as a new sort of interactive format. So again, we're keen to work with people on those.
Great. Just ymwybodol bod amser yn symud yn ei flaen. Mae gyda ni amser am cwpl o cwestiynau o'r llawr os yw'n ddiddordeb. Oes unrhyw cwestiynau ar gyfer Sioned neu Ian? Dwi'n y fyny. Gareth Morlais. Ever dependable.
Dych chi'n clywed fi? Cwestiwn yn Gymraeg, jyst i ddeud, o Gareth Morlais, dwi'n gweithio fel Llywodraeth Cymru. Dwi'n meddwl falle, un peth sydd yn greit am y BBC falle ydy mae yna RSS feed o newyddion a dwi'n cynhyrchu gwefannau hyperlleol a dwi'n gallu arddangos yr RSS ar y wefan. Ond gorau pa fwyaf o gynnwys sydd yn gallu gael ei rannu gan S4C a BBC, really. Os Sioned yn gofyn beth sy'n neis, falle clipio i fyny yr archif, gweithio fo'r Llyfrgell Genedlaethol i wneud rhywbeth fersiwn fideo o be maen nhw wedi wneud efo papurau newydd Cymru. Mae hwnna'n gamaladwy, dwi'n meddwl be maen nhw wedi bod yn wneud yma. Falle bod yna arian Heritage Lottery helpu efo hwnna, dwi'n gwybod. A wedyn assets eraill fel y darnau o ddelweddau sgen y BBC halfraint iddyn nhw ac S4C halfraint, bod hwnna ar gael dan Creative Commons licence fel all unrhyw un sy'n rhedeg gwefan lleol neu papur bro sydd eisiau mynd i fewn i'r gofod digidol, bod yna archif wedyn o gan ddarlledwyr, da ni gyd wedi mwynhau edrych ar eich raglenni chi, mae yna fywyd ystynedig iddyn nhw. A dwi'n siŵr fyna syniadau fel yna'n dod allan yn y Connected Studio ar yr archif, a dwi'n croesawu hynny, ynde? Ond jyst mwy o bethau i rannu fysa'n prif i.
A dwi'n meddwl gobeithio wneud Ian a Sioned Cysylltu, beth sy'n yn dda rwan o ran y ffordd da ni'n cydweithio með S4C a BBC a sefydliadau fel y Llyfrgell Genedlaethol a Amgueddfa Genedlaethol. Da ni yn siarad efo'n gilydd, da ni yn trafod y pethau yma, da ni sylweddoli pwysigrwydd. Trwy gweithio efo'n gilydd, da ni'n mynd i cynnig rhywbeth lot fwy gwerthfawr na bod ni'n gweithio ar ben yn hunan. So mae hwnna'n rhywbeth da ni'n gweithio ar yn rheolau. Amser am un cwestiwn arall, one more question.
Can I just sort of pick up on that just very briefly? I mean, I think this is also a much bigger issue. It's about something that we've called digital public space, and I think for publicly created or funded content, we really want to make that open, and it's the rights associated with that make it difficult. So that's why we're doing it in an educational context first, is to try and sort of sort out how we can deliver this content, be it images, moving or audio content. I think that's what we're trying to figure out, how that's going to work in a different sort of context. But I think it's only right that content that's been created initially through public money should be made available to the public, and we're really keen to do that as part of this wider digital public space.
And I think it's fair to say, I think one of the big issue, and people aren't potentially aware of this, is the third-party sort of rights that there's the issue. So you may have a program that's got sort of archived from a third-party source, or the music that hasn't been cleared, and and there is something when you think of contracts were written, so in the last 10 years, the nature of the business has moved on so rapidly. We forget YouTube wasn't around until 2005. It's staggering to think how young that element is.
So it's working through those models to make it available, and that's something we're really focused on and we want to make work. And I think it will take us quite a while to do it because of those almost unsolvable rights issues in some cases. But I think we can do it in stages, and we're really keen to work with other public creating content organisations to do that. So I think we're all on the same case.
Un cwestiwn arall,
Daf? Just for tua mlynedd yn ôl, ni'n dysgu'n canol Llundain oedd y BBC yn gwneud stwff da am pryd hynny, mae stwff fel rhiant, fi'n dweud bod stwff cyw, y rhaglenni a stwff arlein heb ei ail, really. Just weithio pan mi'n ystod lawr i wneud y darllen gyda rai bach. Wedyn mae'r llyfrau mor sych, a fi'n cofio'r un llyfrau nhw, o'n i'n darllen i blant yn Llundain, a mae'r system addysg yn mor wahanol. Just fi'n falch iawn bod chi'n S4C yn gweithio gyda'r Llywodraeth Cymru. Fi sy'n teimlo fel rhiant ac chi'n athro, felly mae yna dal lot i wneud o ran darparu'r stwff ma sy'n mor dda ar y sleddi, mor dda ar y tablet, wedyn cael rhyw fath o cael ei mewn y system addysg fel bod e'n rhan o'r llwybr ysgol darllen 1 i 7 neu pa bynnag lefel.
Mae o'n i fo criw mawr o ddysgwyr ddoe, a mi oedd 'na tua 80 o bobl aethon ni siarad mewn grwpiau bach efo'r 80 o bobl. Oedd yn gyd yn oedolion, ddim yn blant. Ond mae o'n ofnadwy o anodd i gael y neges drosodd o faint o gynnwys sy'n a sut mae defnyddio'r cynnwys. Achos mae yna gymaint o lefydd dwi'n mynd fel yr amgueddfa neu ysgol rhant fy hun, os dyn nhw'n dod â pethau adra. A mae yna gynnwys ar gyfer gymaint o bethau gwahanol, ond di pobl ddim yn gwybod amdano fo, felly ryw radda hefo yr Hope Plus, y gobaith ydy y bydd y cynnwys mae gyd yn cael ei rhoi mewn un lle neu o lia mae yna ffordd i wybod beth sy'n allan yna ac iddo fo gael ei ddefnyddio. Dwi'n meddwl bod hwnna'n ofnadwy o bwysig.
Reit, wel, dwi'n meddwl bod ni'n mynd ymlaen yn hirach, ond yn anffodus, mae rhaid ni paratoi ar gyfer y sesiwn nesaf. Felly, os ygolwch chi ddiolch i Ian Tweedale a Sioned Wyn Roberts. Right, we'll have a 15-minute break now. If we're back at 3:05 promptly, please, while we set up for the link to New York. Diolch yn fawr. So, just before we start, Brian, tech guys, happy? Diolch yn fawr iawn. Right, welcome back for the highlight of the week for me. We're actually doing a live link with New York in America, that is. Slightly different from the normal arrangement. You have two of us on stage. People think at S4C that Rhys and myself are actually a double act. We're not related. We don't think we are anyway. We haven't checked our DNA anyway. But who knows? Maybe we are. Another conversation. So, yeah, croeso. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi am ddod nôl ar gyfer y sesiwn pnawn 'ma. So we're going to have a very interesting presentation now from Cara in New York. Cara, if you want to say hello and just tell us who you are.
Hi everyone, my name is Cara Chessel. I am a project manager with the New York City Department of Education's Office of Innovation. I've been with the office for about 4 years now, and I've gotten to work on so many amazing projects. My boss actually today is at 10 Downing Street, so we're having a very UK-centric day. Yeah, because ironically, somebody from the team is in London today, so couldn't actually be presenting from New York. They're just down the road. And I believe one of your team is actually from Newport in Wales originally? Maybe. I think that I will confirm that later, but I understand that one of the team is from Newport, left for better things in New York, and is now working in the education sphere. So, right, with no further ado, I will hand you over to Cara. So, obviously, Cara's presenting from New York. We're presenting the slides from here. So that's why Rhys is abling assisting me. So over to you, Cara. Thank you so much. So today I will be speaking about how we're doing innovation in a really large district. And to give you guys basically a quick and brief history of the Office of Innovation. Next slide. Great. So in New York City, our graduation rates had really remained stagnant. They hovered right around 51%, meaning that nearly half of students who entered high school did not finish high school. So in 2002, we ended up having a new mayor. And the mayor of New York City was then Michael Bloomberg, and he took over control of the schools. So instead of having an elected board of education, we now have a panel that is appointed by the mayor and other elected officials. Next slide. So after 12 years, over the last 12 years under Michael Bloomberg, we saw incremental gains in the graduation rate. So we moved finally from 51% to 67%. But we realized that still was not good enough, that there was a lot more that we had to do in order to make really radical improvements. And still we're not graduating nearly 30% of our students. So we established a dedicated Office of Innovation to serve as the research and development lab for the department. At the same time, we really moved towards increasing the autonomy of school leaders by giving them control, not only of their purchasing, so textbooks, laptops, all of those things, they could decide what they wanted to purchase, but they also could decide who they wanted to hire and fire. And so that was a really new thing for New York. At the same time that we gave them that increased freedom, we also increased accountability measures. So we started publishing grades for schools and started keeping track of things really publicly, because if we were going to give them more freedom, we wanted to make sure that they were also accountable. Next slide. So to give you guys some context on the system where we're doing this innovation, New York City has just about the same number of students as Greater London. We serve about 1,700 schools across New York City's 5 boroughs. And what I've been told is that we actually bus more students than any city in the world except London. So London city buses are the only city system that can top the number of students that we actually pass through our system every day. Next slide. And I hope you guys can see, well, you don't have to really see all the little nitty-gritty details, but the gist of it is this is actually the process that we're currently going through to procure new things. And so when we think about innovation, often we think about innovation as a thing, like innovation's an iPad, innovation's, an app. But for us, innovation isn't a thing, rather it's a process. And this slide shows the current process that the DOE, not the Office of Innovation, but the DOE has gone through historically to approach problem solving. And it's really driven not by user needs, but by business processes and legal requirements. So as you might imagine, the process isn't really optimized for innovation in any way. And there are complexities in this slide, which you can kind of see, that even an internal staff person like me can't quite seem to figure out all these little crazy steps. And the process really lies with bureaucrats in a building creating a solicitation that says, okay, this is the type of software we want, without any requirement for actually talking to users. And if we do this process really, really well, we'll end up picking a product that most closely matches exactly how we specified it should work. And that's problematic for a number of reasons. Specifically, it doesn't match the current process that most innovative software companies use to develop new products. And it assumes that the bureaucrats sitting in the building know what best developments should actually be made. Next slide. So if that's our process for bringing in new ideas and services, how can we learn from other creative organizations that are changing the way that they do these processes and how they surface new ideas and products? So other organizations are sourcing new ideas in large-scale events like hackathons, where many smart people sit in a room with lots of caffeine and they crank out new ideas over a weekend. This process, which is unlike most procurement processes, it assumes that the best ideas may not come from us, but they may come from developer teams who can approach the problems in ways that we never thought about sitting in a building as bureaucrats. Next slide. So what is our lever point? Or how do we have access to these types of change processes? Next slide. For us, we created the iZone as that lever point. We see ourselves as being the R&D lab. Next slide. So we launched in 2010, and when we first launched, we thought we need to begin, at the very least, by reimagining the factory model of schooling, where students move through services in batches. And so you can see the first sort of illustration is sort of trying to say, before, we were really putting kids through this process. And instead, we hope to have a more personalized model where we've redefined problem solving and services are individualized to meet the needs of every student where they are. Next slide. So what does it look like? Our process goes through these 3 steps usually. It starts with a user-generated problem definition, whether that's middle school math achievement, for example. A lot of kids in middle school struggle with math. Or maybe it's the difficulty in navigating the high school choice process. Or maybe it's busing or lunches or facilities or data dashboards. Whatever the problem is, we start by going out and sourcing that problem from actual end users. Then we prototype. So we've done this process, we found the problems, and then we actually create prototypes that we're testing out. And finally, the result is low cost, quick turnaround, authentic user voice, and new collaborators with new models of action. Next slide. So the first time that we did this, we launched something called the Gap App Challenge. And the Gap App Challenge was launched last January, and it started with user-generated problem definition. And we did that problem definition by partnering with a global design firm called IDEO. IDEO went out and actually talked to middle school teachers across New York, and they developed the following problem definition that we used really as a provocation or a call to action. So our hope is that people would watch this video and say, wow, I'm really excited about solving this problem. So next slide, if you could play the video. Okay, I think it might be ending. I'm not quite sure. I somehow got muted. Sorry, I got muted, so I wasn't sure where you are in the video. But basically, so we issued that call, and if you go to the next slide. The result was really incredible. We ended up with 187 entries to that competition, all different people submitting apps that met that challenge. Traditionally, with an RFP process, you might anticipate getting 5, maybe 6 people submitting software. This time we had 187 pieces of new software. So what did we do with that software? We worked with 34 educator judges to narrow it down to 39 semifinalists. And what we ended up doing is actually matching 12 of those products to 12 different schools and doing a prototyping process for a year in 94 different classrooms. So the products were tested, iterated, along with the implementation of those products. So teachers learned how to change their practice, and developers learned how to change their products all together through a really iterative process of workshops. We also generated a lot of news stories, and a lot of new supporters heard about our work and were able to see the different ways that we were thinking about it. So next I want to show you what that actual process looked and felt like. And so I have a quick video, it's about 6 minutes, and it really illustrates what that process was like for both the developer teams and the teacher teams. So if you want to go ahead and next slide and play that video.
Today, we're going to start to learn about algebraic expression. Who remembers what a variable is?
iZone definitely has a different way of approaching things, so I really did not know what to expect.
The goal of the Gap App Challenge was to put a call out to innovative software developers everywhere to help close the gap in performance in middle school math. One of the incentives for people to participate in the Gap App Challenge was that everybody who entered had the opportunity then to partner with one of our schools to further refine and develop their product in the context of a real urban classroom. Getting that authentic stakeholder voice, that user-centered design, is really at the heart of everything that we do.
We had dual goals. I had goals as an educator to help develop my students to become better learners, and his goals were to better adjust his product to meet the needs from real-life experiences.
School environments are really different from the startup environment. So startups have their hoodies and their ping pong tables, and teachers work in classrooms with kids every day. And so to get them to work together, we had to some empathy building and some relationship building to make sure that they were talking the same language and understanding each other.
The keys that provided was safe lessons for either side of the team to be able to vocabulary and understanding what user-centered design and in this whole process of innovation was.
The Gap app gave us a facilitated relationship that committed us to communicating with the end users in a way that we would not have otherwise.
We work with the developer every week, every Thursday morning. We talk about things that we can improve, things that are going wonderful, and if there are things that need to be improved, he's on it right away.
We got along. They started using our product right away. They started asking questions right away. We started basically going back and forth.
They essentially asked us, hey, what do you need? What is your dream classroom? What does it look like? And they were able to build around our basic needs. So it's been so smooth.
It was a constant process of growing and changing and talking and coming into the classroom, adjusting.
When we develop, we don't have that feedback, that instant feedback from students, from teachers. And this is what Lauren can bring us. They help us fine-tweak the software. They change our assumptions about how a classroom is run. That exchange is really, really helpful for developers.
And it's very nice for teachers when we find certain frustrations or what we would change to be able to talk to the developers and have that change very quickly. And then our kids to say, oh, look, this has already happened. They really feel like they have a stake in what's going on and that their input matters. And it does. It definitely does. I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
I'm happy to hear that.
Okay, Carl.
For this assignment, you're going to take two songs, okay, that have what?
A similar beat per minute.
Beat per minute. And you're going to match them up, okay, so they have the same tempo, okay? So the first thing you got to do...
We initially thought that the apps would really focus on specific content and math, but there were also needs from educators that arose when we did user research that said we need the support for other things in the classroom, like behavior management, screencasting, and other technology support that wasn't just curricular.
My collaboration with the developers has been really easy. They came into the classroom and helped set up equipment, walked us through things. It's a much more intimate experience with the developer, and that has opened my eyes to seeing that some people do really care about what goes on in the classroom.
Often in ed tech, it's really easy to get bogged down in the backside of the product, and we forget to go to schools and actually ask teachers what they want and what would be helpful. And this Gap App Challenge has really made it very clear that getting into the school is half the challenge, but also like the most important thing you could do as a developer.
These teachers, these students, they are our clients, and we want to transform and make sure that the software works really well for them. And that process means having a back and forth, and it shouldn't be just one annual thing or something like that.
Program has been back to the teacher. Every day that I use the app, it's based on the lessons that I created. It's stuff that I've already done, and it's enhancing. While teachers say, hey, I don't want another plate on the table, this has become the plate. This has become the table. It's become the basics. It's not something extra. It's basically what I'm using every day.
This is the most I've ever used technology. But now that I realize incorporating this program and incorporating technology into the classroom, it opened up a whole new world for me and for the children. Because I'm learning too.
All over the country, districts are starting to go down this path. Foundations are funding this because the very, very clear value that's generated for everybody involved.
So much can come out of this if you just give folks the time and the space to work it out together.
New York is doing something that's completely innovative, and this is definitely something that ed tech needs to be watching because it's really important to our schools and also just like to our kids.
Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that little video clip. I think the really important thing was that it highlighted the process that our teachers and our developers went through, which was really iterative on both of their behalves. And the end result is really better products for both the companies and for our schools. And so it was really a mutually beneficial process. I'm going to describe one more similar process. If you go to the next slide. In New York City, Another challenge that sort of arose was related to the high school choice process. So in New York, you have to pick which high school you go to. And there are 700 options. And so if you can imagine being 13 years old again, for some of us that's easier than others maybe, but if you look back at being 13 and imagine trying to decide between 700 options, and there's so many different schools, and what they had currently given them was a phone book. If you can imagine a phone book and sorting through, and every page is a different school, and you're supposed to find one that matches who you are at 13. And so 80,000 students go through that process, and they're supposed to pick 12 schools. 70% of students end up getting one of their top 3 choices. And so you would think that that's a good process, right? That's a good outcome, but no one likes the process. It feels bad for pretty much everyone going through it. So what did we do? Go to the next slide. We ended up working with 6 different companies to take that handbook that was once a phone book, a paper phone book, and turn it into different apps. And so 6 different companies that we found all had existing companies that did either college finding, comparison shopping, big data, something that was related to the choice process that we thought they could pivot that product to support the needs of our process. And so we created an API, an application programming interface, that took our data and made it accessible to the developers. And then we took the developers through some user research. And so we gave them a lot of information, and then we allowed them to actually test their products with current high school students, their parents, and guidance counselors. And so in 8 weeks, we came up with 6 brand new products. And for us, that is incredibly fast compared to often the year to 18 months that it takes to get these things lifted. And so this year, for the first time, students are going to be able to pick from a bunch of different apps and find one that helps them pick a high school. Next slide. So one more quick example of how we do the user-generated problem definition and then the prototyping. And sometimes we do that, and it's not necessarily technology related. So we don't have to just do it with software, but we could do it with other things. And so at the end of the last chancellor's term, he issued something called the Chancellor's Challenge, where he said DOE offices across the board, whether you do lunch, curriculums, special ed, busing, come to us with a problem that you would like to work on. And so the folks who run busing came to us and said, help us improve the processes that we have. So currently we're working with special ed, and we're developing a couple of paper prototypes, process prototypes, that will actually change the way people receive services. Next slide. So as you can see, our process really spans between software challenges, policy changes, and even school challenges. So what I talked about today was really the software challenges and some of the policy changes, but we've also been trying to apply this problem definition prototype process how schools even do their change processes. So we had a challenge where we asked schools to reimagine family engagement. If you could go through this user process, what would you do and how would you change it? So as a process. It's not a thing, it's not an iPad, it's not the internet, but really how do we get people to think about problem solving differently? So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
I don't know about the rest of the audience, but that's sort of blown my mind. But that's incredible, and it's a classic example because it's interesting what's happening in Wales at the moment is sort of closing the achievement gap is one of the key things that we're trying to do as a country here. I'm sure there are people in the audience who would like to ask some questions, so I will transfer those over. Any hands up in the audience? Yes, we have. When you do, can you just introduce who you are? Then, Cara, just double check if you can hear them properly, and then.
Hi there. My name is Dr. Iestyn Jones from eChalk Limited. We make educational software, and I think it's a great idea in order for the teacher to get what they really need, inviting these developers into the classroom. I was intrigued by the scale of the project, and even when you whittled it down, you said you had 34 finalists who, as I gather it, spent around about a year in the schools in some sort of iterative development process, making sure that the software was tending to what you'd asked for. And what I'm interested in, simply because the scale of this, is how is it funded? Do the developers take on the cost of this process, or does the funding come from New York State in some way?
Yeah, so actually the funding for this process has come from the federal government in the US. There's a grant project called the Investing in Innovation Fund, which actually provides grants for a wide range of innovation projects. And so we paid a small stipend to the developer to allow them to travel. And then we also paid the teachers for their time and participation. So if they ever had to commit after school hours, we made sure that they got a small stipend. And we think that's a really important part of the process, because we want teachers to not feel like they're overburdened by this, because we know that they're already overworked. And so we want to provide them with both recognition and monetary compensation for their participation in this type of thing, because we think that they are probably the most valuable part of this process. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do any of it. So we have to make sure that there's proper incentives for the teachers, as well as the developers. There are other districts who are doing this that have different models, but we think a lot of the early stage companies where we think we can make the most improvement don't necessarily have the funding to pay for this type of thing.
Just one last thing. So imagine when the software's finished and they've honed it, and it's exactly what you wanted as a teacher, does all the IP then stay with the developers?
Did you catch that? You were just asking, once the software's been developed and been completed, where does the IP rest? Does it rest with the developers, or does...
Yep. The IP always remains with the developers. What's interesting in New York City, which I kind of highlighted in the beginning, is that schools are actually making decisions for themselves about what they bring into their schools. And so our hope is that we can better inform them about what they're bringing into their schools through processes like this.
Can I just... Before we move on to another question from the floor, I just want to ask a question as well. Obviously, we're connecting with you today. It's something that we've picked up on in Wales and come across. You have a colleague down in 10 Downing Street talking about it. What is the global interest in this, and and where is that interest coming from?
Yeah, so we participate in a global network called GELP, G-E-L-P, and I believe folks from the iUnit, which are down in the UK, they are leading that work, and it's funded by the Gates Foundation. So we've actually had folks travel over to India, we've had folks go to Australia, but what's really interesting, I think, for us is this software development piece. I don't think a lot of folks are doing that piece of it. I think people are thinking about the problem-solving process broadly, but we haven't seen too many folks globally doing it. I would say in the US, the Gates Foundation has just funded a round of other networks to do this. So Chicago and a group out in Silicon Valley are also doing similar work.
And yeah, are there any questions from the floor? Don't be shy. If you want, I will be asking them. There we are. Yeah, so I was just wondering as well. Obviously, we during the week, this is a week of events, the Digital Innovation Week Wales. Beginning of the week, we were looking at big data. Obviously, with this kind of process, you're actually harvesting huge amounts of data. How are you actually managing that data, and what are you doing with that data?
Yeah, so the project that we did with the high school choice process was actually, we think, one of the first actual projects that had open data with a school district and had a software competition that was based on that open data. So we made the data from the high school handbook, which was already available via PDF, available via machine-readable format, which was the API. And so we actually took all that data and made it public. I think that's one side of it, which is how do you take data sets that the government has and make them available so that people can create useful products that serve the citizens better. The other part of it is the data that we're getting on the student achievement and stuff. I think in New York, in the US broadly, there's still a big conversation happening about data privacy and who owns and maintains that data and what we're doing with it. We're just getting started on that, I would say. And hopefully down the line, we'll be able to know more about the activities that students are doing and how they're engaged in these platforms and how we can improve the experiences based on those engagements. I think that's where we're headed.
obviously that, you know, New York City has actually bought into this from an innovation point of view. Is there a concern, obviously, with this is a kind of idea that starts, it's been developed and it's moving on. Is there a potential problem with a change of administration, or, you know, how secure are you that this is going to continue for a period of time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we have support both from the private sector, from foundations, and from the federal government in terms of funding. So we're not necessarily concerned about the funding running out. And we think that when we are able to frame it in a way that makes sense for people who aren't from this sphere, that they understand the value in it as well. It's just that we have to change sort of the vernacular that we're using to make people understand that what we're doing is innovation, but it's also a process that meets the needs of people in a better way, in a more authentic way, and actually sources real solutions to those problems without going through a process where big companies are the only ones who can take advantage of it, and we therefore only get the same type of thing that we have always been getting.
And also, seeing in the video that we were hearing a lot from teachers, but what's the response been like from pupils and their parents, and how do you harvest that information, and how does that feed back into the program?
Yeah, I think what's interesting in New York is depending on what school you're in, it really depends on what type of parent engagement you have. And so some of the schools, you know, we heard a lot of feedback that people were very excited, and from other schools we didn't really hear much. And so I think in those instances there was kind of an expectation that we would be doing these type of innovative practices. And so when you have a less engaged parent side of things, it actually can be easier in that, like, you don't have to explain that, you know, my kids are not guinea pigs, because they automatically assume that they're going to be trying new things. In instances where there are more parents engaged, we have had conversations about, you know, when is the right time for these products to go into schools? What type of due diligence do we have to do to ensure that we actually aren't harming student progress, that these things are rolled out in a way that we are sure that they are creating good and not doing bad. So in instances where we are less sure, we make sure that there are far lower stakes environments. So we do a series called Shark Tank, which is, if you've ever seen the TV show, the American TV show, basically the idea is that these new products get put in front of angel investors, and they give them a lot of feedback, and they say, this is a bad idea, or this is a great idea. And we do the same thing with teachers and students and parents, and we bring in early products and we have them give them feedback. And so in that environment, we're not actually bringing it into a classroom, and so if it's too early, we're not having the risk of it going poorly, but we are also giving opportunities for feedback outside of the classroom setting.
Interesting. Before we wrap up this session, is there any more questions from the floor? Yes? You have one? Again, for Cara, if you can introduce yourself and let us know who you are. This will be the one question, Cara, and I'll let you go.
Hello, hi, it's Jonathan Lewis from BBC. I work on the learning side of the BBC. I was just wondering, from what I could see there, a lot of the apps that were being developed were focused on the classroom. I heard recently someone say, you raise attainment in the classroom, but you close the gap outside of the classroom, and that sort of shows the importance of the family. Was there any work done to help engage parents at all through this program?
Yeah, so for this particular program, the GAP app one, there was a specific focus on middle school math and engagement inside the classroom. Some of those tools looked like behavior management, grade books that really made teaching easier from the teacher side, and then the other ones were really content. The work that we're doing with families was really from a separate challenge where we were specifically targeting engagement outside of the classroom. And so that challenge looked a bit different, and it was really led by the school teams, and usually that consisted of teachers, administrators, and parents who created prototypes that they were testing in the field, whether they were technology or not technology, to see whether or not they could better increase the family engagement. But that was a separate process from the technology gap app. So we've pointed this process towards a bunch of different problems.
Cara, I don't think I can thank you enough, and hopefully at some point we can actually invite you here in person so you can enjoy the delights of Cardiff
and Wales. Felly diolch o'r iawn I Cara. Thank you very much. Right, we'll just have a short break and then we'll reconvene for the final panel session. And diolch I Rhys, so thank you to Rhys and the team at the back. Nobody slept last night because of this.
We did.
I didn't. You were rolling over. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Croeso i'r sesiwn ola dydd, y sesiwn panel. Welcome back for the last session of the day, the panel session. Slight change. Due to popular demand, I'm going to chair this because it is fairer on Adam, because Adam can contribute wholeheartedly to the discussion. So if everybody wants to take their seats, again, this will be a bilingual, multilingual, potentially, session. So if you've got your headsets, if you need them, then that'll be great. Brian, are you happy? Tech guys, are you happy? Lovely. So I'll just explain. Hannah, who was going to be originally on the panel, unfortunately closed her hand in a door and broke it this morning.
Or a hand?
Both, I'd imagine, so she couldn't make it. Professor David Reynolds this morning, unfortunately, had to head back for some urgent business. Tom Crick, who stood in for Hannah, unfortunately, he couldn't be here later on. So I'm sort of stepping in with Adam, and Sianed has come in as well to sit down. So I just thought with this session now, we just have a sort of just look back at the day and a review of the situation, looking at the potential for creative industries in Wales and how they can sort of benefit from working closer with education. So I think if I start off being very unfair with Adam, seeing as he's just landed here, Adam, wyt ti eisiau sôn dim bach o ran dy gefndir di o ran Nesta ac o ran y math o waith o ran arloesi da chi'n neud, a wedyn hefyd sut mae hwnna'n wedi bod yn berthnasol o fewn Cymru wedyn?
Ie, diolch yw. Sefydliad arloesedd ydy Nesta, i rai ohonoch chi sydd yn gyfarwydd, wedi cael ei sefydlu nôl yn 97 fel adran o'r Llywodraeth y Deyrnas Gyfunol, ond sydd bellach ers 2 blynedd yn elusen annibynnol, ond sydd yn hyrwyddo arloesedd ar draws pob sector ac yn bob cyd-destun. Ond un o'r pethau dyn ni yn hyrwyddo yn fawr, dwi'n gwybod os taw ffôn fi neu ffôn, ie, dyna, mae yna rai anfanteision i dechnoleg.
I'll take the blame.
Un fi off. Ydy arloesydd o fewn y gwasanaethau cyhoeddus, ac yn yr cyd-destun yna, fel dyn ni o'r farn, wrth gwrs edrych ar draws y byd, un o'r pethau sydd yn taro chi ydy bod gwledydd bychain a dinasoedd a ranbarthau falle ydy rai o'r cyd-destunau mwyaf positif ar gyfer arloesedd yn y sector cyhoeddus. Mi oedd yna adeg pan oedd y Seland Newydd yr enghraifft yn cael ei ddefnyddio fel rhyw fath o testbed ar gyfer y diwydiant telegyfathrebu ac yn y blaen. Ac pan dyn ni edrych ar arloesi o fewn sectorau fel addysg, fel gwelwch chi gynnau Efrog Newydd, wrth gwrs, Mair cyn-fair erbyn hyn, Bloomberg wedi sefydlu tîmoedd arloesedd o fewn gwahanol gyd-destunau, gan gynnwys, wrth gwrs, yng nghyd-destun addysg a defnyddio wedyn ni dulliau newydd ar gyfer greu arloesi ac yn greiddiol i hynny, wrth gwrs, ydy'r digidol. Un o'r gwledydd sydd wedi bod ar flaen y gad o ran arloesi yn y sector gyhoeddus, yn y gwasanaethau gyhoeddus, ydy Denmark. Llywodraeth Denmark, nôl yn 2002, wedi sefydlu tîm o ddylunwyr ac arloeswyr o'r enw Mind Lab mwyn dod lan y syniadau newydd, ffyrdd newydd o ddilifro gwasanaethau cyhoeddus ac yn y blaen. Ac o'n i siarad gyda cyfrwyddwr Mind Lab y ddiweddar, Christian Basin, ac oedd e'n gweud 90% o'r atebion o'r syniadau newydd sydd wedi dilifro o ran y gwasanaethau cyhoeddus wedi bod yn ddigidol. Felly mae'n dangos pŵer y technoleg i wneud pethau'n well, i wneud pethau mewn ffyrdd gwahanol ar gyfer diwyllu anghenion y sector gyhoeddus, a bod gwledydd bychain, maen nhw rhywbeth yn wneud y gwledydd bychain, sydd yn creu rhyw fath o testbed gwych ar gyfer arloesedd. Somebody said to me the other day that actually there's something about, a nation the size of Wales, it's a perfect size for innovation. It's big enough to be significant. If you can create an innovation in Wales that works, then you can put on your marketing material that you've innovated for a country. And that, in terms of the global marketplace, and health and education are the two fastest growing sectors in the economy in the whole of the European Union. That's an important distinction. And of course, it's a national market. It's a coordinated market as well. So there's something about small countries which works. And of course, it's big enough to be significant, but it's small enough to be manageable as well. So it's a kind of perfect test bed environment. And there are huge opportunities in terms of learning technology. One, very, very briefly, predictive analytics. We're moving, I think, from a phase where technology was helping us to learn, where technology increasingly can learn about us. And we've seen a couple of universities in America, Purdue in Indiana, there's another one in Tennessee, an Israeli university, Ben Gurion as well, who've shown now that you can use the combination of digital devices, big data, analytics, etc., to learn about how we learn. And in the context of the classroom, that means that we will be able to actually intervene far earlier in terms of people's learning journey, so that we can actually, in the case of these universities, they've been predicting the grades that people are going to achieve, but then helping them to change their learning pathway and to achieve their potential by understanding about the individual. Are they a visual thinker, or are they more of a text-based learner? And then changing the learning pathway for that individual. So that's just one little area, one little context where I think we're just scratching the surface at the moment of what technology can do. And that's using data science, but certainly on the content side as well. Huge opportunities. And Wales is a perfect place for this. We've got Hub, we've got a national government, we've only got 22 local authorities and probably fewer by the day. It's a great environment, and if it can work in Wales, Wales is a far better market, actually, if you look at it in those terms, than the market next door in England, where you're having to sell increasingly to individual schools because local education authorities have disappeared to a large extent. So it's a good environment. Technology is maturing to the stage where it can make real advances in terms of people's educational achievement. We have a huge achievement gap, as David Reynolds would have stressed. So it's a fertile environment in so many ways, and Nestor is very, very keen on helping people who want to work and bringing the technology and the opportunity that we have together.
Brennan, if I can move on to you now, because again, I think you have an interesting sort of view on this, because obviously you work pan-European. Do you see any sort of trends within Europe, within certain countries, about where things are developing?
As we speak now, and during the day, and I think we should be mindful that in order to give innovation room to develop, to not be sort of too structured around it, where you need to take many more risks. If you look at the model they're doing in Finland, for example, where you would invite actually industry into the classroom or to the university to actually co-sponsor and try out the piece or the process innovation, if you like. So I think being a little bit risk averse, if different countries are struggling with being very innovative, and some are performing much, much better because there's a much higher boundary for taking risks, as an example. And there's also something about coming out with a piece or a process innovation, if you like, before it's ready. I mean, if you take Microsoft, for example, they launched a lot of new solutions which have been tested, but not so thoroughly that it's free from mistakes or errors. And you got to take that risk. So I think innovation is very much allowing yourself to be in a constant beta mode. There's no right wrongs. It's more like allowing yourself for failure or learning from mistakes as you go along.
Sioned, os ga i troi at chi am eiliad, fel gwlad lle mae canran uchel iawn o'r bobl sydd yn siarad Cymraeg, maen nhw'n bobl ifanc, dwi'n meddwl bod rhywbeth fel 40% o poblogaeth sydd yn siarad Cymraeg yng Nghymru o dan 15-19 sydd yr oedran yna. O ran cyrraedd nhw efo o fewn addysg, ond hefyd o ran cynnwys, sut wyt ti'n gweld yr her yna o ran wneud yn siŵr bod yr iaith Gymraeg yn iaith sydd yn berthnasol iddyn nhw?
Mae hynna'n anodd, achos er bod nhw mewn ysgolion Cymraeg ac yn y blaen, maen nhw'n defnyddio rhyngweithiau Saesneg, Facebook Saesneg, trydar yn Saesneg ac yn y blaen. Dwi'n gwybod dwi'n gweld o'n ymhlant fy hun, ond o ran be da ni'n neud o FS4C, be da ni'n defnyddio'r ochr ddigidol o bethau mwyn cyrraedd at y bobl ifanc yna. Na i fod yn hollol, na i defnyddio unrhyw gimmick os lici di, rhywbeth fedra ni'n neud mwyn cyrraedd allan at yr oed, ac mwyn iddyn nhw ddefnyddio'r cynnwys a meddwl bod o'n cool, ti'n gwybod? Dwi'n yn gwybod os na dyna'r ffordd gorau ymlaen, ond i fi dwi'n dod o'r ochr cynnwys, yr stori, y cynnwys, os di plant isio darganfod mwy, os dwi'n isio mynd ar ôl y stori yna, neu ar ôl y cynnwys yna, rhannu hwnna, dyna sy'n gwthio pethau, dim y technoleg bob tro, dim ochr y pobl ifanc y plant.
Yeah, I think again, representing the BBC, a very large organisation that has huge impact on daily lives of people in the UK and especially in Wales. So how do you see the BBC's role in order to sort of fill that sort of innovation space from a content point of view, but also what you're developing?
I was really taken by the point you made there, in the sense of, I think it's the innovation that is what we're here to talk about this week, and I think the way in which we can get new types of content commissioned, new types of almost processes established that sort of break down the traditional sort of commissioning modes, I think is quite important. So I think, and it's not just us; it's a range of different organisations. So I think that there's always a tendency to sort of commission in a vertical way, and commission in a very structured way, where it's you almost know the answer to what you're trying to commission, and that's not great in an innovation environment, because you almost want to just set the challenge that you don't know the answer to, and then open it up, bring people in who you don't work with normally, and people who might be from a completely different sort of part of the creative industries, technology companies and so on. I think we have a number of reasons why that doesn't happen in quite the way it could. I think it's about the way in which public procurement works and commissioning processes in that sort of environment. So I think if there are ways we can get around that, and there are a couple of formats that we've got. You know, we talked earlier about Connect Studio. I think that in itself that is quite important, but I think it's just a different type of commissioning model where you can sort of open a challenge and invite people along to work with you and be surprised by the sorts of things that come out of it. And I think it's that sort of unexpected outcome, but also knowing, I think for public bodies it's actually quite hard to fail. And you know, if you are putting public money into something, you want to make it work. And I think if it doesn't quite work, you sort of want to say, oh, we'll just sort of bury that. But I think actually the idea of failing quickly and then moving on and then setting on something else and not being worried by that. And I think there's a range of things that certainly I think the private sector can bring to this model, which can inform the public sector. And I think it just needs a different mindset and a way in which to work across different types of organisations.
I think following on from what you're saying now, and I'll open this up to the whole of the panel. Obviously, some of us are representing public bodies, some of us from the commercial sector. I'm not sure, what is Nesta? What are they?
It's a charity.
Charity. Yeah. So again, we've got different things, but we're all people who fund things. There's the issue of funding. You know, who should be funding this? You know, because I think we're looking at it was interesting with the Gap App Challenge that was funded from federal government. From a funding point of view, where do the balances lie? Should we be working more to bring these pots of money together, private, public? Rennie, what do you?
Again, it depends on what kind of innovation we're looking at. But I think these large-scale projects have to incorporate different bodies. I don't think commercial sides or the public sector can do it by themselves, and I don't think they should. I think there's an idea behind actually having that collaboration between different bodies. And as you say, it's also about having a different creative input, and really do innovate instead of just thinking about it, or just improving bits and bytes, and trying to explain that's innovation. So I think the mere term innovation is really difficult to grasp. I'm sure if you asked people here, and sorry for taking you hostage, you would probably have 10 or 15 different explanations of what innovation in fact is. I don't think we're quite clear on that. So yeah.
So, Ian, from a public point of view?
Well, I mean, I think because we have the luxury of not having to make money out of something, it should be a good test bed for us to be able to try things out and then move on. If it doesn't work, and if it does work, really build on it. So I would say that's a very valuable reason for the publicly funded organisations to get involved in it. I think we also need to work out how we can facilitate the development of new markets as well. So I think that's quite important. It's something we're really trying to achieve around some of the archive development stuff we're doing, because this is a brand new market. It doesn't really exist at the moment, and if we can facilitate that and do it in such a way that it's a win-win for commercial and the public sector, then I think that's a great thing, as long as we're focused on what it is we're trying to achieve. It's really difficult though, because public bodies tend to sort of work in a particular framework, and we just need to break that sometimes.
And Adam, from Nestor's point of view, obviously from projects that you fund and develop, it's not just the things that are successful that are beneficial, but also things sometimes fail, and learning from those outcomes. So from your point of view, from a funding point of view, how do you see sort of moving forward? Where is this money going to be coming from?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, we learn as much, if not more, from failure than we do from our own successes, or indeed, our successes are built upon those experiences, and so it's important to prototype. Prototyping is a little bit different to pilot. Pilots are the kind of is the language that the public sector traditionally has been very comfortable with. But a pilot is usually making a big, it's making a medium-sized bet, and then investing a lot of political capital in this idea, and then hoping that if it's a failure, then people will forget about it, and if it's a success, and probably the train builds its own momentum. Prototyping, as we know from from digital technology, from software, etc., is about maybe trying as many different things and iterating much smaller cycles, because that's how we learn, and doing it in as open a way as possible. So I think the public sector and education is part of that. It's kind of learning a little bit about that different way of innovating. What is innovation? I mean, there are a million definitions probably, but I mean, it's ideas plus execution, isn't it? Really, and I'm just thinking. I mean, you're right. I mean, there are different levels of scale here, and there are things that can be done through challenge prizes, as we heard from New York, and we're very keen on that. We've just created quite a big challenge prize, the Longitude Prize, for 10 million, but you can do it at different levels of scale. And maybe next year we can have a challenge prize around education, and maybe we can run it over the week, because there are things that with sprint and agile, you can do some things in a relatively short period of time as kind of beacons, really for other projects. But there are some things which are a bigger scale, and maybe then you are looking to some of your bigger anchor companies and anchor institutions In Wales, we don't have that many large companies that have deep pockets, unfortunately. And hopefully, one day, when as a new entrepreneurial wave goes through the economy, we'll have more. But the public sector institutions, and particularly the broadcasters, have an important role. And just thinking about what's happened in media, media has gone through a similar phase as education. So media moved from a kind of a broadcast model, where you were a passive recipient. Well, that's very similar to the old tradition in education of the sage on the stage, and people in rows turning up timetabled. We had a schedule in the media. And the way, I think there are interesting parallels to the way that you've reinvented yourselves and gone into a world of on-demand. And been real successes there. I'm thinking of iPlayer and how could that be transposed into the world of education, which is now shifting to a child-centric model, where I'm not necessarily, just going to class. I'm driving my own learning. I'm creating my own schedule, because this is the world that young people are familiar with. They build the world with the tools around them, the resources to hand. And that's what education, I think, is grasping after. And in a sense, you've kind of done it. And there's been some pain, isn't there? Because that was a learning experience. And I just wonder, what would an iPlayer look like for education? Really at scale there. And in a way that has become mainstreamed, I mean, it's not for the digerati, it's become a mainstream part of our culture. Could we create that as well as the sort of the million prototypes? We need both. We need an innovation ecosystem, which is about small companies and startups and having bright ideas. But we also need probably a little bit of infrastructure as well.
I think you're right about the scale element, and I think actually in Wales we do have some sort of core advantages. I think a lot of money has been spent, I think it's 30-odd million pounds in terms of broadband networks. So the plumbing has gone in and is there.
The networks actually within the schools as well.
With a lot of effort and sort of work has gone into building the hub platform, for example, which I think is quite, if it's not unique, it's not far off, certainly in the UK. And then I think people are starting to get the kit out into the schools, so the sort of the iPads and all the other devices that are going out there. I think it's really a case of those core infrastructures are there. It's a matter really of the content industry stepping up now and sort of working with schools and colleges and universities to sort of deliver a whole range of things at scale. I think we haven't quite got the scale bit right yet, but I think it's really early days, but we've got the levers to be able to do this in Wales. And that's where I'm really encouraged, in the sense that I think we can commission across organisations opting into common challenges, which I think is something I'd really like to see happen over the next year or two, because I think there's the opportunity to do that now. We've got the sort of the underlying infrastructure in place.
Yeah. Adam, you mentioned openness, right? Just thinking from a commercial point of view, how difficult is it for you from an IP point of view to create sort of technologies that you can share, open source? Because obviously,
yes.
You're a business.
Yes. Well, we try at our best to have an open business model approach, which if you take our latest solutions, they're actually governed by open source software. We used to be a proprietary software, but we changed that in the recognition that that is what the world looks like. You cannot have proprietary software, and you cannot expect that to work in a public classroom, if you like. So you've got to be open source. But that wasn't really our sort of mindset, but now it is. So for us, that was a pretty big shift. Now we're having Google, for example, developing software for some of our robots, which is in the cloud, meaning everybody can tap into that and actually do their own development with our robots. I think it's grand, it's fantastic, but it also means that you need to be very open in the way that you conduct your business, because you're using, or you're sort of motivated to use other bodies that would promote your brand. Because not all people are aware, not even classrooms, teachers are aware that there are different kinds of openness in the software that are applied in the classroom, and it's not really a Lego. What if it doesn't work? So there's a lot of concerns in terms of IP, and also tapping into the corporate social responsibility area and say, well, we'll provide the brick, and we're happy to have somebody else supplying a piece of software to make that work. I think that is what the world looks like. We have to be on that track, and it makes a ton of sense. So, yeah, does that answer you? Yeah, it's very concrete.
Sean, os gael troi at chdi am eiliad, dyn ni sôn am, i fi dwi'n meddwl un o'r problem mawr ydy o ran maint y cynulleidfa a cyrraedd y cynulleidfa yna, a bod cynulleidfaoedd, enwedig pobl ifanc, yn medru defnyddio i iaith nhw, a bod yr elfen yna o ddiwylliant yn bwysig pan dyn ni sôn amdan technoleg. Sut da ni'n medru ymateb i hwnna? Sut da ni'n medru perswadio pobl ifanc bod yr iaith Gymraeg yn iaith da chi'n cool ar gyfer codio felly?
Ie, mae'n anodd yn dydi, ond dwi'n meddwl da ni'n gwneud eitha dipyn o waith efo enghraifft efo hacio yn mynd o amgylch ysgolion ac yn trio cael denu pobl ifanc o chweched dosbarth, a wedyn bod rhywun rhyw fath o llys genadon wedyn ar gyfer gweddill yr ysgol, a bod nhw rwsyd yn medru treiddio drwodd ac yn bod yn atyniadol i bobl ifanc. Ond os gael ddod yn ôl at y pwynt o ti'n sôn am arian ac am sut i dalu am syniadau newydd ac yn y blaen. Un peth sy'n ddiddorol nes Pedorec ac sy'n help mawr dwi'n meddwl ydy bod gynnyddu potiau gwahanol yma. Wedyn os oes rhywbeth yn gomisiwn allan o'n arian arian dwi'n gyfrifol amdano fo. Mae hwnna wedyn, da ni hefyd, os yw'n syniad newydd neu syniad digidol, da ni hefyd yn mynd i tapio mewn i arian digidol, i'r SDML ac yn y blaen. Mae'n cymryd mwy o amser, mae rhaid bod yn eitha penderfynol a mae rhaid bod yn syniad da, ond mae yna botiau gwahanol arian, a mae hynny wedyn yn lot fawr o help mwyn just gwneud yn siŵr bod ni, os ydyn ni'n methu, gobeithio na ydyn ni ddim, ond o leia mae'n dipyn bach llai o risg wedyn yn does.
A dwi'n meddwl mae werth jyst y tegu yma i bobl bod yn ymwybodol o ran y potiau arian sydd yn bodoli yma yng Nghymru. Mae gen S4C cronfa digidol sydd yn edrych i buddsoddi mewn syniadau masnachol arloesol, ond rhai hefyd sydd yn ychwanegu gwerth i'n gwasanaeth cyhoeddus ni. Mae Llywodraeth Cymru, yr adran y diwydiannau creadigol efo'r Digital Development Fund, sydd eto yn arian sydd yn medru cefnogi arloesau. A ddim bod Gareth dal yma. Gareth Moles yn y cefn. Mae gen i fo pot o arian hefyd. Naw yn y rownd diwetha, a dwi'n meddwl mae'r rownd nesaf o comisiynu mynd i fod yn agor yn y flwyddyn newydd. A mae hwnna'n cronfa o 200,000, dwi'n iawn i ddweud? Tua 200,000. So mae'n lot o meddwl, ond beth sydd yn dda hefyd, mae'r cronfeydd yna, da ni gyd yn siarad efo'n gilydd hefyd. So os yna ffordd, da ni'n medru dod y gwerth trwy cydweithio efo'n gilydd. I'll talk about these different funds. What's key for us as well is, and one of the things that we're not tapping into is possibly the private sector, how they can invest in some of these things. So we've got public money. How can we leverage that to actually bring private finance in? Do you find that a challenge that people come to you asking, we've got projects, can you invest in these projects?
Yes, we do, and we have a pretty clear policy on that. If the project fulfills a number of criteria, we're happy to look at it. And the family has decided to give quite a bit of money back to society. For example, in sponsoring PhDs that would study early childhood development. So currently we have a number of them sitting at Cambridge University, which is obviously governed by that university but funded by us. We've just been running a collaborative approach to deprived area, actually here in Cardiff, and I think it was in Barry Island, where we would fund robots in school, and we would provide lesson materials and training for teachers and schools who might not be able to afford that. Again, there's a pretty strict process of how we do it, but absolutely, and to me, it's a corporate social identity, and it's a big responsibility any corporate should have, and we take pride in really doing that.
I'll be giving you a call asking for some money for some Welsh language project. Okay. I've got your number from somewhere.
You're more than welcome.
Dwi'n meddwl yna agro yr panel I fyny i'r llawr, and I'll open up to the audience. Are there anybody with any questions or any sort of observations they'd like to add to today's discussions?
In English, please.
Or Danish.
Or Danish is fine.
My limit is TAC, I'm afraid. You can see from my watching Danish television.
Yes, TAC.
Gareth Morlais, just disgwyl Gareth, and just the microphone if you want. Well, he has to sit in the back.
Is it better to do it in English? I will.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Okay. I was just going to say about the public sector innovation, which I know, Adam, that's one of your big things. I think there's a lot we can learn about in Wales. I've been really impressed having been on days with the HRC. I think Kewn, they had a day today, didn't they? But I've been to two of Creative Exchange Network Wales's projects. I think the React sandbox model is really, really good. They work with the arts and academia and private sector and academia. What I think might be missing in Wales is a chance to work between the public sector and academia and the public sector and private sector. There might be some little bit of glue that might be useful there. And the other thing, there are some models we can look at. The NHS Hack Day, I think, was a good thing, but it was a point in time. And I think what the Senedd is doing is really good with their e-petitions. And also, tomorrow they've got a day about democratic deficit that Richard Sambrook, former editor of BBC News, is online is doing. But a question for Nesta really is there something that Nesta could do to sort of bring together the public sector and the private sector, or the public sector and academia, or the public sector and arts, so we can work together?
Very well anticipated, Gareth. I didn't plant this. Yes, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think innovation often comes from combination, doesn't it? It's when you actually take insights from one sector and you translate it over into another. And so building bridges between different worlds is critical. And so yes, we're looking to create working with Cardiff University primarily in the first instance, and the Welsh Government to create a public service innovation lab to try and generate new ideas and then prototype them, trial and test them in the field, and then gather data. And so that's and then one element of that would be a digital test bed. So we see, I mean, as I was saying earlier, we see huge opportunities. You mentioned health. It's interesting in Wales. You remember a few months ago, there was a fuss on the Today programme about anonymizing medical records, so you could look at different patterns and create algorithms which understand, like what are the risk factors of this group, and etc. Huge things that you can do with big data analytics in health, and they've delayed it now for 6 months because of the hoo-ha. Well, I don't know, it's an open secret. We've had it in Wales for several years. It's called the Sale Data Bank in Swansea. It's two big, huge buildings next door, and there's a third one going up, next to Singleton Hospital, Swansea University and the NHS working together. We've anonymized 58% of our GP records and all of our hospital records. I think actually one of the highest rates in Western Europe. So we've got the data. The thing we don't have is the tools. So the data is sitting in a big data dumpster, as Cesar Hidalgo would say. What we need now is the app developers. We need the coders, the API developers, to work with this data set. And that's the bit that we need to build. The link between, and it's mixed groups that you need. You need data scientists who can work with coders, work with user interface designers to create something that actually clinicians can use. And that's just an example in the world of health.
I'd agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, sorry.
So I was just going to ask you actually, because we've been discussing several times about connected studios, but there's no reason why that model couldn't work within completely different disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, you could call it something else completely, but I think it's about an innovation model where you get a mix of people. I think the bit that's missing, and in addition to the tools, is almost cultural. And I think it's about the people who have the pots of money, if you like, need to be a bit braver in working with each other and working with people that they've never worked with before. And actually, from the work that we've done, I think there was quite a lot of mistrust about what we were about and why we wanted to do this innovation stuff. people thought, are we going to nick their ideas? We're going to steal their ideas, and that's absolutely not what we want to do. And the IP relationships we've established show that. But I think it's about having a senior level in certainly the public bodies, a bit more of a braver approach and an approach to say, look, it's all right to work with these other people. You don't have to worry about that. Just do it. And I think once people sort of unbutton a bit and just sort of start talking to each other and being a bit more open, I think great things can happen. And it sounds a bit sort of soapbox, standing on your soapbox sort of thing, but we know that it works, and we know that we can do it. And I think we've got a lot of those levers that you mentioned earlier in Wales. I think we can actually achieve this. It's fairly straightforward. It just needs a bit of will to do it, and then the people on the ground will make it happen.
I think it was interesting with the GAPA presentation. You know, I think one of the reasons that has succeeded, obviously it's still in its infancy, was the buy-in from the administration of New York. They had a belief in it, and you know, and because it does take it's a big step into the dark, and you know, it takes a brave person to make that choice.
And also, are we asking the right people? For example, you know, young kids, sixth formers, they probably know a lot more about innovation and about technical systems than old fogies like myself. So. You know, we need to find ways of accessing those young people and getting them involved. And you know, I've been really inspired by the New York film.
Just a short comment. At the risk of my really ignorant and complete lack of knowledge concerning Wales, I think I agree with what we're talking about here, but there's a big prerequisite. I think one of the main reasons why this app is a success is that it's trying to solve a real life problem. It's 51% that were graduating, which is just way too low. So they identified a very, very specific, apparently maybe even a threatening problem to the society. And I think that's where you get the buy-in. And I think what we're talking about here is that I think we're talking a little bit about innovation per se. I think you need to find that spot that justifies the investment and make, you know, we'll have people buying in on it and sticking to it.
It's that pre-work to get the challenges right and to really understand what the issue is that is a common issue, I guess.
So from Nestor's perspective, then, how do you assess those, you know, when you're actually coming up with sort of innovation funds, what's the process involved in order to actually come up with, you know, a challenge?
Well, I mean...
Shall I put you on the spot? Slightly. Hard question.
Indeed, that's an exam question. You know, it's in dialogue, isn't it, with people in political authority. I mean, so it depends to some extent on the political priorities, but it's also within from our own perspective. We want to work in areas, challenge areas which are significant. So where we have identified, well, this is a big problem that needs some new thinking. So health and aging for us is a key area because, you know, around the Western world we face a huge demographic sort of time bomb which we still haven't really addressed or resolved properly. The achievement gap in education, which was, you know, really what Brenny was just referring to in New York, is a problem generally in the UK and certainly within Wales. I mean, it's one of the key priorities. The economic achievement gap, if you like, which is it's a much more those two are pretty complex. Much more deep-rooted in many ways, and has been, you know, a feature for many years. But certainly that would be an area where you could consider there might be broader buy-in because everyone can see that, you know, because we're so far behind at the moment in terms of our economic performance. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think sometimes talking about innovation doesn't help you innovate. So becoming obsessed by the process. I mean, there's a toolbox, that we can use, and it's useful to know about that and to get skilled. But it's a kind of a, you know, our muscle memory in innovation only improves by doing. So it's while fora like this are very, very important because it's how we connect and have ideas in conversation. But we're only innovating when we're doing. So prototyping, building labs, not think tanks, is really the way forward. I think test beds.
Are there any more? Another question?
We've talked a lot about skills and innovation and lots of sort of abstract terms or concepts, but it's about people, isn't it, really? And so my question to all members of the panel is, how does my baby daughter, or for that matter, a 12-year-old living in Tonapandi or Ammanford today, compete with the data programmers or the front-end web developers in Singapore, the Philippines, and India tomorrow?
Good question. I got a flight to catch.
Would you like to?
It's a great question, and I think it's spot on. I think there are several answers to it. I think first of all, she needs to be exposed to innovation, whatever that might be, and that exposure should come from different angles. It shouldn't just be innovation in the classroom. I really hope that she would be invited by local companies that would invite her and her class to see what they do, and actually have her trying it out. That's very much the hands-on approach. Other communities that I know of and that I visit in towns and so on, are quite good at inviting, people that, young people into what they're doing and having them trying it out. So it's not all just about money. It's also about connecting with people who actually are in innovation and are in business, because that's sort of the outcome of what she's trying to achieve on a longer scale. And then she needs parents like you who come here and understand the impact of innovation and bring that back home and maybe buy some software or some well, maybe not toys, but lesson materials.
Some Lego.
Not Lego. No, I didn't say. Yeah, no, I don't know any. That's fine. You're welcome to. But young people need parents that are able to talk about it and show them what innovation is, because that's where you, I think, invest in getting your kids to understand the importance of being entrepreneurs, of being, as I talked about, instead of just being consumers, also being creators. So to me, it's two suggestions for answers. I'm sure there are many more, but that's what I would do.
I think there has to be a purpose to it. I think it has to be within the context that it's something that she would want to do, in the sense that she wants to create an animation or to make a game, and then the tools have to be there so that they're taught. There's a lot of really excellent work around cross-generational media literacy in lots of schools in Wales at the moment, and they're absolutely fantastic examples. If you get to hear of their work or invite the teachers of them.
Ian, briefly?
Very briefly, I think from our perspective, it's certainly in BBC, there are certain things we can do by sort of leveraging our brands, and I think using some of our big drama brands to inspire and motivate, I think helps in that particular case that he's suggesting. So I think that's what we're trying to do, and so I think it's about also, as a broadcaster, we can raise these issues in other contexts. We can say, look, there is a challenge here. There's an issue that families need to be across, not just beating school teachers around the head. It's actually for everyone to be across, and I think that there are different players who can do different things in that. So I think your answer is quite different to mine, but I think between us, we can sort of raise a lot of that and the knowledge of it and come up with a few solutions.
Finally, Adam.
The one thing that I think I'm most proud about that we've done since devolution was embracing learning through play, and the Finnish model, and the foundation phase. Now there might have been a little bit of a rollback, but the core of the principle is still there, and I'd like us to take that principle through beyond 7 and say, what does that principle, which is teaching our children and young people that they are makers, that they are creators, in this world of ours, and increasingly that's the reality of the world that we're in. You know, the tools to create are becoming universally available. And that means in business, that means disruptive innovation. Yeah, smart small companies are, stealing markets away from the big companies, and they're terrified by it. Yeah, but in every area this is happening because those tools are becoming more accessible. And so we have the possibility of creating a generation of makers, but we have to create the learning environment for them. And we took that brave decision and think, no, we've got to follow through. I'd love to see us make a commitment. We're going to create a nation of makers, of coders, of creators. And that should be the spirit of our entire, education system. If you look to the countries of Southeast Asia, in some ways, I mean, Singapore's doing all right, okay, yeah. Though many, their young people kind of leave,